Narrator Nellidene Howell. Address Rural Route 1, Box 256, Payson, Illinois 62360. Telephone number 1-656-3551. Birth date July 4th, 1912. Birthplace 3 miles north of Hull. Interviewer Nellidene Howell. Date and place of interview Rural Route 1, Box 50, Hull, Illinois 62343. Where were your parents born?
Were my parents born?
Mm-hmm.
I think my mother was born over in Missouri, near Howell. And my dad, I think, was born near New Canton, Illinois.
If they were not born here, why did they come to this area?
Well, my dad lived at New Canton when they were married, and so they just stayed in this area.
What were your parents' occupations?
My dad was a farmer. He farmed, and my mother was a seamstress.
Did the Depression affect their jobs? How?
Well, I think that it affected all of us. A farmer had a hard time raising anything because it was so dry, and I think that that's what was hard on them, as they couldn't raise as good a crops as they should have.
What level of education did your parents complete?
Well, I'm not sure on that. My mother was very well educated for her time, because whenever we missed school, she taught us at home, and then the teacher said we caught right up with the rest of the class. And I'm not sure, but I know they had a good education for their day, because my dad was a lovely penman. He had he was a lovely penmanship writer. His writing was really, really nice.
How would you describe your home during the Depression?
Well, my home wasn't any different than it was before the Depression. Outside of, we didn't have everything probably that we might have needed, but we made do with what we had.
Was it owned by your parents?
Yes.
Did your neighborhood change during the Depression? If so, how?
Well, the neighborhood during the Depression, they were more concerned about one another. They were concerned about their livelihood. They was concerned about whether someone was ill, and if someone needed to go to the doctor or to town, they were always willing and ready to take you.
How many brothers and sisters lived at home during the Depression?
I think there was just one. I was married in 1931, and so I was away from home, but I had a brother that was still at home.
Were they employed?
He was in high school.
In federal work programs?
No.
Did anyone else live with your family during this time period?
No, I don't think so. It could have been that my sister and her boy lived with my mother and father during this time. It could have been that.
What did your family do for food?
We raised a big garden, and my dad raised hogs, and we had a cow that we milked, and so and we raised chickens. We had a good living.
What did your family do for entertainment?
But we read mostly. During this time, during the 30s, there wasn't much entertainment outside of the home. Neighbors would get together and have a evening of visiting and maybe games, but it was mostly just in the neighborhood.
Did any of your relatives help you survive? If so, who? In what way did they help you survive?
Well, as I said, I was married in 1931, and of course the Depression started before that. But my dad butchered a calf, and he gave us a quarter of beef, and that helped us out with the meat situation. But other than that, we raised our own garden and had our own chickens and things like that helped us.
Did you go to church during the Depression?
We did. We went to church during the Depression. That was one of our things that we went to.
Did the activities revolve around the Depression? Did your church help in any way for the people, for all the people?
I think everybody was in about the same situation. I don't remember that part. But we were all about the same situation, and I don't believe that it was necessary that we had help.
Did you ever see a bread line?
No, I never heard of the bread line.
So there wasn't one in your town?
No.
What did your town do for all the people, or government?
Well, now we have to go back, if you're talking about government, we have to go back to Frederick B. Roosevelt was our president at that time. And he brought on what they called the New Deal. He created WPA camps, or WPA work for men that was out of work, that didn't have work, so they could make a living, and they paid them, of course, for it. They built bridges and fixed roads and cut brush and whatever was necessary. And then we had the CCC camps. That there was one down just this side in New Canton, and it was full of young men. And they also sent them out to do work on the roads. And I just can't remember everything they did, but they built bridges and whatever was needful at that time. But Frederick Roosevelt, our president, wanted to bring the economy up. And this was during World War II that started, shortly after the Depression. Trade with foreign countries was bad, and he wanted to bring that up. But we had what they call a dust bowl during the Depression. The air was so full of dust you could hardly see at times, and especially in Kansas, and the wind blowed it across Illinois, and the ground was so didn't have any moisture in it. I planted onions one year and a garden, and they never got much bigger than they were when they were planted. And you couldn't raise anything. Our gardens were so dry. And the stock market crashed in 1929, and it helped bring on the Depression. People panicked. And that was before I was married that the stock market crashed.
Did the Depression change the way you celebrated the holidays?
Definitely. You folks wouldn't believe how that we celebrated very quietly. We always had a big dinner for Thanksgiving and for Christmas as usual, but you didn't celebrate what I call celebrating. Generally stayed home.
How was your house heated?
With wood. My husband cut wood, and we had wood stoves, and wood and coal. I'll say wood and coal because we had both, but mostly wood.
Did you have any pets?
We had a dog.
Did your pets' eating habits change in a way of not getting as much food as it had before?
No, I don't. We didn't buy dog food, that's for sure, but I don't think there was such a thing as dog food back then. But they got the scraps from the table, and they did fine.
Did you have to change your eating habits?
Definitely. Our eating habits was so much different than they are today because you I baked my own bread and cinnamon rolls. I did lots of canning. I canned, in 1933, we had a wonderful peach crop. No, 1934, we had a wonderful peach crop, and I put up many, many quarts of peaches and gave peaches away to others. But our eating habits was not like the art day. You didn't think of junk food. There wasn't such a thing as junk food. You was tickled to have the basics.
What was the worst part of the Depression?
Well, there's several things that was bad. I can't just say just what all was bad about it, but one was you couldn't travel anywhere. You had to be very careful with your spending because my husband worked for 50 cents a day, and now that seems terrible today. But he did, and he shucked corn for I think 5 cents a bushel. I'm not sure on that. I think it was 5 or 10 cents a bushel. I think it was 5. And he would go to work of a morning by daylight and shuck corn all day long. And it was so much different. You just can't hardly believe. Eggs were 5 cents a dozen, and I don't remember some of the other things, but it was, your money went a long ways because you didn't get very much money, and it went a long ways in buying.
Were there any families that were worse off that you saw?
Sure. My husband did have work, but there was some families that didn't have work. But I just can't, I have written down a few things that, of course, gas, I told you that it was 10 cents a gallon, but a lot of people couldn't afford a car. They couldn't afford to buy a car. And the car didn't go very fast then. There's Model T's, and they didn't go fast, so gasoline went along much, you could drive much farther on a gallon than you can today. You asked me a while ago what we did. On We generally went to town on Saturday night and buy our supply of groceries for the week, not for the day, a day for the week. And that was one of the pleasures that we had of going to town, and we got to meet friends and neighbors there and talk to them. And we had to save in some of the instances, they had to save through the summertime enough money to last through the winter time, because the winter time was there was less work than there was in the summertime, and people walked a lot. I walked 3 miles to school, and I graduated from high school in 1930, and I walked 3 miles to Hull High School and 3 miles back at night. And I graduated in 1930. But the winters were so much colder than they are today. The winters were bitter cold, and sometimes our neighbor would hitch a sled, and snow would stay on all winter long, and it was fairly deep, and my neighbor would hitch the team up to he had a sled on runners, and it was a big one, a long one. I don't know just how to describe it, but they would put straw in the bottom of the sled, and lots of times they'd pick us school kids to school. But it was, we walked nearly all the time.
What level of education did you complete?
I graduated from high school in 1930. I told you that a while ago.
Did you have a job during the Depression?
I worked for a neighbor during my senior year.
Did your money contribute to help support the family?
Sure.
When do you remember first being aware of the Depression?
Well, I think that we were aware of it, as I told you a while ago, a long time before it really started. Because it really started back in 29.
What are 2 or 3 of the most important world events that you remember happening during the 1930s?
You asked me what some of the important events were. That one was the Dust Bowl during the Depression. The stock market crashed to help bring on the Depression because people panicked. And our president, Franklin Roosevelt, brought on a new deal, creating WPA and CCC camps, which I think I told about a while ago. The president wanted to bring the economy up because trade with foreign countries was bad.
Can you recall for me what a typical day was like and what you did to help your family cope with the conditions of the Depression?
Well, the main thing with coping is that you tried to fix meals that were nutritious, and you had to also be careful because you didn't have a lot of things to deal with or to cook with like you do today. You had your garden things and the things that you canned, and so you did the best you could with that you had.
Here are a few more things that Nellidene Howell remember from the Depression.
in 1934, a couple of men that run a lumber camp up in the hills north and west of Kinderhook walked down to our house, which was very close to Kinderhook. They were cold and hungry, and as we were ready to sit down to supper, we asked them to eat with us, and they did. Then they asked my husband if he would drive. We had a car at that time, and he asked him if he would take them on down to their home in New Canton. And this was such a very cold winter, as I think I mentioned before, that our winters were much, much colder than they are today. And it had snowed, and the snow stayed on all winter. Things didn't get better, for when spring came, we had a flood, and a bridge went out near the Raymond Meyer place south of Kinderhook. And the water was up to our yard, and then we all had to go and take typhoid shots. And at this time, in 1938, my husband worked for Roy Lice, that lived there in Kinderhook. He worked on the road, the county roads. And it wasn't steady work, but it was fairly good pay. And we saved money enough in the summertime to buy the necessary things for winter. That Christmas, I made candy and cookies and things for Christmas, and I couldn't eat any because the doctor said my sugar count was too high. So after I made all that, I couldn't eat any of it. But the children, I had 2 boys then, and of course they could make good use of it. And for entertainment, during the early 30s, a few of our friends would come. We'd all get together, maybe one night every 2 weeks, something like that. And we would have oyster soup supper, and our neighbor played the violin, and I played the piano. And so we sang and visited. But we had a radio in 1934, and we listened to it a lot. And we got to hear all of the world news that was given at that time. But you go back to what we did. We baked bread and baked things. We had to depend upon our skills in this matter. And we had a Model T Ford. And of course they didn't go real fast like the cars do today. So you had to start out in plenty of time if you were going somewhere, so you'd be sure and get there in time. And gas wasn't high, so but it was high according to our wages at that time.